Okay, lovely to see you, so many of you here. I think that we thought that by conversation 4, it might have quietened down, but it's fantastic to see so much interest in work with adult learners. So great to see those of you who've been to other sessions, and great to see those of you, very warm welcome to those of you who are just joining us for the 4th session. And just to repeat, the aim of why we're having these conversations is very much about us at the Lifelong Learning Centre at the University of Leeds, taking time to review our work with adult learners in relation to the outreach and the adult education and the student support work that we do with adults at the university. We thought this was a useful time, thinking that we may be going into some kind of new normal in terms of delivery, but who knows? I think what I would have said in conversation 1 might have been a little bit more hopeful than what is said now, but who knows? But anyway, we felt this was a good time to review, reflect, share with colleagues in the field, and to get your reflections and your thoughts as well in relation to the work. So we have condensed what we're doing to 1 hour today, and whether that was a mistake, you know, we'll get feedback from you, but we thought with the 4th conversation, with doing reflections, that we'd keep it shorter. The housekeeping, you will have picked up that the event is being recorded, and at some stage you will be sent recordings. It certainly won't be next week given workloads, but you will certainly be sent recordings. So for those people who have not been to the other sessions, then the recordings will be sent to you. The format of today's session, I'm afraid you're going to get a lot of me today. I'm going to kick off with some reflections, thinking about the wider context of our work. And then I'm going to pass it over to 3 of my colleagues to give short personal reflections of how they view their work in a wider context. And then there will be time, we'll have time for questions, and then we hope within the hour that we have time to have short working groups, because we've found out that the discussion in the small groups has been really, really useful. So I am going to try and share my screen. Just bear with me. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yeah, that works for Lindsay.
Okay, so the session today is about reflections on the intertwining of civic engagement, adult education, and adult widening participation. And I have to say that the team of people that I work with, although our remit is very much around widening participation, and that is generally where the funding comes, the widening participation premium, and also the teaching that we do in the Lifelong Learning Centre. Our ethos is very much around the wider context of social engagement, liberal and radical adult education. There is a long history of adult education with working class communities at the University of Leeds. And that is a history that we adhere to and that we try to promote in the context of what we do within the remit of widening participation in lifelong learning. So, our reflections on our conversations. The first week we looked at the importance of impartiality, both in information, advice and guidance, partnerships and adult education. So how we viewed what we were doing in terms of impartiality for the local, for the city and the region, as well as the fact that that impartiality really has a very positive impact on our delivery. We then looked at the university contribution to community adult education. So we had examples of work that we now do on campus, non-accredited work that we do on campus in the community. These examples at the moment have been happening online, but they have been continuing to happen. We had an example of work that we've done with staff teams in adult education and a case study of work that we have done with foster carers. Last week we talked about relationship building and the notion, the contested notion of belonging in relation to pre-entry, preparing students for higher education delivery, as well as what we do when mature students have started on our programs. And very much we see a lot of academic skills and student support in the first stages of people's study. So these are all examples of work that we do. We have created a framework called Transforming Horizons. And that framework includes 3 stages. The first stage is our initial engagement with communities. So very broad activity with communities who may be far away from higher education, but we are working with them in a sort of adult community learning way. The stage 2 is more to do with work with people who may have or working towards some intermediate qualifications. So we do a lot of work around people who are working at GCSE level 2, where we feel that just like at schools, people at GCSE or level 2 may be doing a level 2 qualification for a very instrumental reason, but they're not necessarily clear about the choices open to them. So that is an area that we step in, and we work particularly closely with further education here and also WA and other adult education providers. The stage 3 is more about the preparation to and working with people who know that they really want to go to university. So we do a lot of work with people who are on the Access to HE programs at FE. We are doing preparation. Obviously, we support UCAS forms. We do a whole range of preparation at that level. So we feel that all these areas of Transforming Horizons can relate to a wider impact of the work that we do. So just to get a little bit of wider context, we know that adult participation in general in learning has declined very, very severely since 2010. So I've put up the fact that it's nearly 4 million adults who have not taken part in adult education, 4 million less than prior to 2010. We also know by the Adult Learners Survey, the link that I'll try and put up before the end of the session, that the issues around the pandemic, that there was a lot of adult learners did get involved in learning during the pandemic, but those who didn't were far more likely to be low income and lower level education. The government and the Office for Students, and before that, the Office for Fair Access and HEFCE have all talked a great deal about concerns about the numbers of mature students entering part-time education. And in the last decade, again, after the introduction of fees, there has been a huge fall off in the number of mature students related to fees, related to the fact that there has been far less part-time provision in the sector. Those of you working in the sector will know that this year there is an increase. UCAS is saying there is an increase in mature students coming into the system, probably due to people reskilling, people affected by redundancy, and they are coming into full-time courses. And it looks, if you look at the figures, that there is quite a high proportion who are going into vocational areas such as nursing. So the response that we've had, just general response from the government in relation to what's been happening in adult participation and mature students, is the government talking about putting more resourcing into local adult education and encouraging or pushing both FE and universities to be increasing their access across all ages, entering into full-time and part-time programs. And the OFS has responded accordingly, and looking or pushing the sector again to increase its numbers. And one of the responses is, and we've heard from other conversations, colleagues from UniConnect talking about this, UniConnect broadening its aid range to include more mature students. And I'm sure that's something that we'll probably be coming back to. So I have just put a word cloud together of my thoughts of the wider context, what we're working in now. We hear plenty about building back better. We hear plenty about the reskilling, the levelling up. We're promised, we've got a national skills fund. There is a post-16 education bill that has started going through the House of Lords now. There is a push on FE and HE partnerships. Adult skills budgets have been devolved regionally. Skills budgets and the skills agenda is supposed to be employer-led. There is the talk, well, we know there's the lifelong learning entitlement, which is coming in on 2025 with pilots happening before that. There's a push for more flexible learning within higher education provision, talk about micro-credentials, so the more flexibility in funding. As we all know, there's an awful lot of flesh to be put in this. You know, there's a real drive from the Orgard review recommendations, and we will all be looking to see the implications of that for our work. But so we can see, for us at the Lifelong Learning Centre, we certainly see opportunities here, and we also see risks, which we can come back to later. What is, I think, very positive is the strategic response from higher education and the 2019 UPP report around civic engagement, and the development of the Civic University Network. Universities in Wales have got a civic mission framework that they have put together. And I've also linked to the Universities of Sanctuary, which some of you will know. But I think the notion about universities' engagement with community engagement and civic mission, which is something that some of us in adult education have pushed on and on about. It's great to see actually the reporting and the sector coming together on. I've just put up a visual, I don't know if you can see, this is from the UPP report about conceptualizing the civic role for universities. And clearly, during the pandemic, universities have really demonstrated what they, how they can contribute to the civic mission and civic engagement. So we can see various ways that we can contribute to the civic role, but it's good to see in the visual adult education and training actually articulated there. And we, in relation to the work that we're doing in Leeds, we connect with the Community Learning Adult Education Board. We're connecting with the West Yorkshire Combined Authorities in relation to skills, and also we're connecting with other non-education agendas like well-being and mental health. So that's the external context. What we also think is incredibly important in the work that we do in adult education in the lifelong learning is our connections with activity and agendas within our institution. So we have connections and report on equality, diversity, inclusion. We are very much part of the student success framework. So the work that we do pre-entry and in academic skills absolutely supports the issues around non-continuation, attainment and employability. So we ensure that we link throughout the whole student life cycle. We're involved in social impact. The research agenda, you'll have picked up the case study that we did about the Differ Act last week, is part of that research agenda. In our non-accredited work, we continue in adult education fashion to try to develop innovative pedagogy, which we then disseminate and is certainly picked up by colleagues who are undertaking accredited work in the Lifelong Learning Centre. We're involved in the Sanctuary University, which relates to the work being undertaken in universities on asylum seekers and refugees. On sustainability and climate change, which is again a wider context, civic context, we're involved there. We believe that instead of thinking about mature students and students from underrepresented groups as some kind of deficit in the university, their inclusion is very much about enriching the academy and demonstrating to the academy how our cohorts of students and our students themselves, the student voice and the different student voices are so important in that enrichment. And clearly also that we are contributing to the local skills and employment. So I will stop there and just check. Is there any questions or comments that anyone wants to make? Thank you, Daniel, for putting out the UPP report. Nothing? At this stage. Okay, are we okay then to go on to some personal reflections from my colleagues? Olivia, are you there?
I am, yes. Sorry, I'd put my video off for a moment and forgot.
Olivia, do you want to
Thanks,
kick off?
Lindsay. Yep, sure. Okay. Can everyone see that first slide? Good, okay. So just a few minutes really to speak about, well, the year we've had and what it's left us thinking about. So reflecting on our digital practice over the last 16 months. I've just done a quick calculation. Sometimes it feels like longer. Obviously, I work with Lindsay, Fiona, and the rest of the team in communities and partnerships in the Lifelong Learning Centre. So it's how we've managed to continue engaging communities, how we've retained and built new partnerships, but what we're kind of thinking about and the challenges of that and where we take it from here. That's going to be the focus of what I'll speak about for the next few minutes. So normally this time of year, we'd be out and about in the community at lots of different summer galas, bringing a stall with leaflets and activities for families and individuals to just come up and have a bit of a chat with us and think about what their next steps might be. And often that would be the first engagement for someone who then may come on to a taster event or the Jumpstart course or a summer school or, you know, one of the outreach interventions that we might do over the year. This year, that Zoom screenshot gives you a bit of a flavour of what our activities have looked like. It's been a very different year, as it will have been for all of you in lots of different ways, I'm sure. So just a quick recap of the activities and the challenges of the year. Obviously, we had to move very fast to pivot to online delivery, but we've been really, really conscious. Although we have been exploring low data options and trying to innovate and use things like Sway or WhatsApp, you know, low data documents and ways of contacting people right from the start, we're still conscious that we are missing certain groups. And in the Office for Students Insight Bulletin just in May, where they were talking about remote learning, widely adopted during lockdown, could provide more flexible learning opportunities for the adult workforce. Well, yes, all well and good, but as Lindsay's highlighted, it's still the most disadvantaged who are excluded from those opportunities. So it's not as simple as this will increase mature participation across the board. It's thinking about who's still excluded from that. And yeah, we've had some successes in terms of managing to keep connected with our community partners and our FE partners. Visits weren't possible to colleges this year just because of the constantly changing situation. In terms of engaging with groups online, there was definitely an appetite earlier in the year, both to attend events and to come on courses, but attendance has declined as society's unlocked and Zoom fatigue set in. But what's been interesting is when people have come along to things, there's definitely that appetite to connect with others, to see faces, to build connections with other people in a year that's been quite isolated for people in lots of ways. It's been very much a year of reflection and action, so experimenting with approaches such as bespoke sessions for different groups, looking at developing little bits of audio for podcasts or video extracts that we can share on social media to engage with people in quick, creative ways, and also those low data resources. But our community partners in FE and the local authority and voluntary sector have often been very much in survival mode. So for one, there's been less provision for us to connect with, and our work can't exist in isolation. It's only adds value to what exists in community adult education and other work with adults in the local region. And obviously, when partners were working on those immediate survival responses of dealing with the fallout of the pandemic and poverty and redundancy and mental health issues, educational progression wasn't always a key priority. And it's a constant task for us to keep working with partners in a mutually beneficial way and finding the links and the connections where our work makes sense to whatever their targets and priorities might be. And yes, we've had to learn fast and develop new practice, and we have managed to reach some new groups, but we're really thinking now as we come to the end of a year of delivery, where do we go from here? Will it be hybrid outreach next year? Because there's been some real positives about connecting with people online, but how can we add value to what is happening locally? Because otherwise it doesn't make sense in isolation. So this is just an example of one place where we were able to cascade practice, share ideas and what we'd learned from digital delivery at a tutor forum for the local authority adult community learning tutors. We were invited to come to their kind of staff development session and share some practice, some ideas, things we'd picked up, but also very much taking into account their context, the barriers for many of their learners and the platform that they were using. So it's very much about differentiated learning, providing lots of support around digital skills, explaining what's involved, very resource intensive, which isn't always feasible in poorly funded work, and looking for low-tech solutions. So just a few examples there. But just to finish with what matters, our work is all about building a sense of community, enabling people to feel part of a community when they join events, when we reach out and connect with people locally. And that's been really important online as well, and common grounds, building connection where people have really sought that. Supporting digital skills, which is resource intensive. So for example, ringing everyone who might be joining a course and talking them through what's involved. Not being afraid to keep creative approaches. So still, if we might use a bit of drama or a bit of creative writing, finding ways to bring that into the online space. So that's challenged our brains to find ways of doing that. And providing multiple points of contact where people can engage either with bite-sized opportunities, so short 1-hour sessions where they can pop in and learn about a particular area, or more sustained courses which have a lot of support around them, but very much always starting where people are at. So identifying issues that are relevant to them, not assuming prior knowledge, and really kind of engaging people where they are there. And we like to say that we've been very good at modeling lifelong learning by making mistakes publicly and not being slick, and very much kind of just being like, oh, well, we're all learning here together. And actually, I think that's been a positive because, you know, we've had to learn fast, and for people who might be terrified to join us, that's been quite important. And
Olivia,
just to finish,
I'm going to stop you there.
Okay, sorry about that.
Thanks very much. That's absolutely fine. Just want to try and make sure they get everybody in. But I'm going to go straight on to Mohammed. Mohammed, are you there?
Yeah,
thanks, Olivia. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Mohammed. Thank you, Lindsay. You'll be pleased to know there's no slides, and I'm going to keep mine brief as possible. So Lindsay asked me to just share my thoughts. So I just wanted to talk about how the strategic direction on civic responsibility for any higher education institution can have such a profound bearing on the person on the ground living in communities on the doorsteps of these universities. And I'll do that by just talking briefly about my thoughts and offering a brief case study of somebody I met quite recently who felt they'd gained a lot from the outreach the university offers. So yeah, I'm a careers advisor by profession, but I have a background in adult education, and for the last 20 years I've been working in widening participation and outreach in the local communities around West Yorkshire. In my opinion, I found local communities living on the doorsteps of civic universities to be generally very proud of their local universities. However, I found there's also a disconnect due to places like, say, Leeds, where there's oversubscription at the university. So it would be quite rare for somebody in these communities to know somebody who's either attending a university like Leeds, or maybe a researcher, or even teaching at a place like Leeds. So that sometimes gives that feeling of, well, it's a different world, and it's for people from a different class, and not for the likes of us. I recently met somebody by chance who I had advised many, many years ago, I think over 10 years ago, and he took the time just to talk to me about where he was at the moment. And So this was somebody who came to this country maybe 10, 15 years ago. He'd been in the country a few years and he'd just got disillusioned. He'd left his own country because of the lack of opportunities there. Ended up in Leeds eventually, but found himself completely disillusioned. He was living in on a state where he was facing racism on a daily basis, he said. And he was seriously considering leaving the country and going back to his country of origin. Somehow he came across at the university non-accredited courses in the community, and he started one of those, and he said from there he's never looked back. Basically, he said those courses built his self-esteem, gave him confidence to then look at other courses. He'd never been educated as a young man, so he was advised to do his English and maths, and currently he's finishing his MA at the University of Leeds. He's done his BA here, and he was saying altogether he'd completed 17 accredited and non-accredited courses since starting on those non-accredited courses here at Leeds, including doing vocational courses and qualifying as an electrician. But more importantly, what he's done is, within his community, he's become a role model. He's encouraged countless people to think about education and higher education. He's set up residence forums. He says to me, look, it's given him a way of having political awareness to bring about change in his community. So the point is that the ripple effect of that community engagement and that civic responsibility of the university can have such a profound effect to level up inequalities in communities if that will and that strategic direction of institutions is there for helping and doing work in the communities of universities, communities on their doorsteps.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. Absolutely on message there on the levelling up. I'll go on to Fiona and then a quick comment. Okay, Fiona, thank you very much. Kick off.
And unlike Mohammed's refreshingly PowerPoint-free presentation, I'm going to go back to a PowerPoint. I'll just share my screen. Hopefully that is, I need to go from the beginning. All right. Okay, so I'm Fiona. I work in the Communities and Partnerships team, along with Olivia, Mohammed and Lindsay. And yeah, Lindsay asked for some kind of reflections on our conversations events and some personal reflections. So I'm going to talk about kind of the community and university kind of work and how critical thinking and activism is across all of that, and also use my own, I suppose, career or learning journey as a way of kind of locating that, which is, so yeah, so I hope that will be okay. So really, I think throughout the conversations, we have had this theme of, you know, why should universities be involved in adult education? What part can they play in this? And like Olivia was saying, it's about kind of adding value and what we can do to help. And like Lindsay was saying, it's linking in with what's now seen as the civic mission, or what we would see as our kind of social responsibility and social engagement with universities, communities, which, as Mohammed said, can feel very disconnected from the university. And there feels like a very kind of big power imbalance a lot of the time. And so just kind of asking those questions. So this is just thinking of my own kind of professional journey, I guess, and locating myself within the context of adult education. So I started off teaching, well, volunteering in ESOL and basic skills in community centres, and then started teaching, and I think that was where I started to really understand the importance of the kind of adult education principles of starting with pupils' experience and understanding where they're at and what they're at, and what they want. So not imposing any type of education on people. And the idea of pupils' experience is equally as valid as each other, and as the tutor is not the expert. And how this type of learning is really, really powerful. Again, kind of linking with Mohammed, how people can use it to kind of increase their or develop their critical thinking further, and engage in wider issues within society, and kind of understand more what agency they might have. And there was a very clear promotion of anti-oppressive teaching, anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobic, and it was, again, linking back to society today, kind of the different movements that are going on. And I just mentioned these 2 qualifications that I did. It was the first one, I don't know if anyone else did this, it was a City and Guild initial certificate for teaching basic skills. And it was about 8 weeks, and it was run by adult tutors at Leeds City College. But it was probably the most profound learning experience I've ever had, because it was very much turning on its head everything that I thought about education. And I also mentioned my PGC I did, which was a great example of student-centered learning, and again gave people a freedom to explore what they wanted. And I just kind of mentioned those because it's so important, I think, for people in communities and volunteers to have that clear pathway into lots of different areas. And this is like a clear pathway into teaching adults. And I was at an event recently where there were some great examples of, for example, ESOL including critical thinking. But one of the participants was an ESOL tutor, and she was saying how her colleagues didn't really consider critical thinking as part of the curriculum. And I'm not sure, people might know here, whether it is or not. So I think it goes back to the importance of kind of embedding critical thinking wherever is possible within tutor training or whatever it is. And so after that, my next step was into the voluntary sector. And again, it allowed me to understand the flexibility and creativity that can happen in the voluntary sector, the freedom to work with people as individuals or small groups at where they want and when they want. And again, it was allowing us to find the spaces for that critical thinking in any setting. So I think a real appreciation of what the voluntary sector brings and how important it is for people to engage in a way that they want to get engaged. And then my next step was to the University of Leeds, where I have worked for over 20 years now. So it allowed me to look at this from a different perspective, for kind of in terms of community engagement and outreach, and understanding the partnerships with further education and adult and community and voluntary sector from the university perspective, and the kind of power that is within that. And I think this very much is changing the university understanding that it has this power within the it's a very powerful player, I guess, within the city, but that it also has a civic mission, and it's not always what it can bring to communities, it's what communities bring to the university and what individuals are offering the university that is very important. And that links in with kind of more recent things like the ideas of co-creation and developing work together. And I think within our team, we are kind of quite embedded within the local city, like, for example, as members of the Adult and Community Learning Board within the local council or within various voluntary sector organisations. And so again, it's just thinking of pathways for people. Again, it's the kind of theme that's run through, I think, everything that I've done is looking at spaces for people to think about things critically and to explore their realities and their agency within that. So final reflection. So really just to kind of wrap all that up, just some reflections again across the events, just the importance of accessible opportunities and routes for people from communities to reflect on their experiences and analyse in whatever way that is, and universities can definitely help provide that and support that and add to that. And the impact of what's happening. So again, it's universities recognising what people and communities bring. And I can think of kind of a number of our students at the Lifelong Learning Centre who are activists and have been able to use their university education to develop that further. So for example, we've got one of our students is leading a kind of awareness campaign around knife crime, and she has got support from the university to develop her kind of community organisation further. We've got students who work within the voluntary sector in lots of different ways. And also quite a lot of students who've gone into adult education as tutors. So again, kind of going back to the importance of university partnerships with community workers and ACL tutors, the idea of co-creation, question mark, because I think that is a term that is used a lot, and it's not always, again, it's kind of issues of equality. And again, the importance of broadening the context, going back to the kind of civic mission, linking with the sustainable development goals of ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for all, which links to the idea of sustainability and university social responsibility. So kind of broadening out this in a very global as well as local and national way. So I think that's the end of my reflections. I'll stop sharing my screen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiona. So you'll have picked up on, very personal reflections and really kind of demonstrating on a whole variety of factors the wider way that we can work, and the fact that it is, it is about commitment. I think, I feel, and I'm sure other adult educators, feel very lucky to have worked in this field. Just looking at the chat, John, thank you very much for plugging. That looks a really, really useful report. And certainly I was thinking that we should have a link, John, in chat to the Centenary Commission. Thanks very much, Bev and Gail, for talking about our practice. And Willie, I mean, one thing that I wanted to say before the end of the session, I would really like, if people are interested in doing some comparative work or looking at some innovative activity that we can do in our different settings, because in terms of promoting it in the sector, it's so much more, more worthwhile if it's more than one institution doing. So, if Sheffield would be interested in doing something around this with us, that would be absolutely fantastic. Does anybody, Joe, Joe used to work at Leeds, but it's good to know that she's missing it. Okay, has anybody got any questions for myself or my colleagues? Or any comments? Neil.
Thank you very much indeed, Lindsay. Thank you. Neil Spears here from the University of Edinburgh. I hope you can hear me okay.
Yeah, you're coming loud and clear.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you to everybody for their reflections, much appreciated. Just a comment that I wanted to, for maybe some of the speakers to think a little bit about, and I suppose, Lindsay, it was more to focus on that very notion of what it means to be a civic institution.
Yes.
And of course, you make reference to the Civic University Commission of 2019, which of course very rightly points out that just because an institution does a few civic things doesn't make it a civic institution.
Absolutely.
And I think we'd be very, very well within our right to suggest that the vast majority of institutions across the country are far from civic institutions.
Yeah.
But then of course that develops to the other thought, which is that actually currently in society, you could equally argue that civic institutions have perhaps been stripped of legitimacy in many ways because of their behaviour, their actions, perhaps, their legacies of policies, of practice, indeed of perhaps deception and public lying. And so what we have to say is that while we can see very much so, as we are all dedicated to serving our working class communities and adult learners within there, and it is our life's work, of course, the institutions that we work with and are part of are sometimes the problem. Because the trust, in that kind of very Freudian notion of the trustworthy relationships that we work so hard to create, and that trust often just exists between individuals, maybe between yourself, Lindsay, or myself, and those or your team.
Absolutely.
And in actual fact, it's the universities that are distrusted. So I wondered, perhaps from your experience in Leeds, if some might be able to comment on a few of those issues. Thank you very much, Lindsay.
Neil, these are really, really important thoughts, because I would hate you to think that we were being at all idealistic. I mean, a lot of the work that I suppose that we try and support around connecting with university, the agendas of universities, because you're absolutely right. You know, I mean, and I'm sure other colleagues will pick up on, you know, the universities may label at the moment, if there's government push, if there's OFS push, as civic institutions, but it's how far that can go. For our work, Neil, it's about how do we find the hooks? We know what we want to do, and how do we find the hooks in order to do it? How do we find the agendas, both within the institution and out? And as far as possible, you know, in a very small, a very incremental way, can we do in reach? How can we influence the institution? And I'm sure maybe others of you have got thoughts about how we do that, but you're absolutely right. I mean, there's a big question mark, and again, what does a civic institution mean? Again, it's going to be another contested term. Does anyone want to come in there? Willie?
Well, I mean, I think it's something we started to discuss in the seminar a couple of weeks ago, the last one I was at. But I mean, my only observation is that I think, I mean, and I'd be interested to hear more about Leeds' take opportunities and challenges in the current context of consultation and new, you know, lifelong learning loans and all the rest of it, because that conversation feels to me as if it's happening in a very fragmented way, and it's very hard for us within our individual institutions. We can't kind of own this thing called lifelong learning and many of the policy agendas in the way that we might have been able to in the past. So whilst it's an opportunity, it's a really hard, I think it's a harder conversation to have within individual institutions because there are now so many more stakeholders involved. I don't know whether others would recognize that.
Yeah. John, have you got your hand up?
Yeah, I have got my hand up, Lindsay. Thank you. I just wanted to say what I think I've said in the chat.
Yeah.
That I think these sessions, I've only attended 2 of them, but they've been really rich and worthwhile. And thank you for them. But more concretely, I think they have pointed to me to the importance of what a really strong and committed lifelong learning arm can do for a university. And I'm conscious of the contrasting histories of your university and mine, which in many ways are similar and would have been similar up till 20 odd years ago. But at Leeds, you somehow managed to keep a lifelong learning arm, and at Nottingham, for some reason, it disappeared. And that has enabled you in some way, I mean, together with the commitment, obviously, of the colleagues you have, to keep, and despite, you know, all the problems you've encountered, to build and keep these connections with community and so on, in a way which a university like mine has almost entirely lost. Now, I mean, I think what I want to say is that we need to use your experience and the experience of other departments, and there are a few which have managed to do something similar, to point the institutions such as mine to the to what they have lost. Well, not so much what they have lost, but what they have, what they could build by taking some lessons on and by putting some resource into this. That is in line, as you say, with the the Civic Universities Commission, blah blah blah. But we need to and I was really wondering whether we could put on some events which look at, I don't know, strategies for rebuilding adult provision and so on across the university sector. Perhaps, through you all or something like that.
Yeah, I would really like for us to do it, because I say it's all very well, having a good story to tell at a couple of institutions, but it's how we influence the universe. Well, how we influence the universities to play their part, and I think, as we've said throughout this conversations, in many ways this is a movement, given the centrality of lifelong learning. So yes, John, I think we should come back and discuss. I am very conscious about timekeeping, doing an hour, and I just want to ask people if they would, for those people who can stay, if they'd like to stay and go into rooms. And I tell you what I was going to suggest that people talked about and reflected on, if I can bear with me. Okay, so if people want to go into breakout rooms, I was going to suggest that colleagues talked about what links can or could you make internally or externally, which can intertwine and add value to the work, the outreach work that you are doing with adults. Does that make sense? And can I have hands up with those of you who would like to go into breakout rooms for 15 minutes, so we would finish a little bit later. So we've got at least one breakout room.
Request to restate the question, Lindsay.
I requested, oh, sorry, I'm not looking at my chat. Oh dear, 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 dear. The question being, this is about your reflections, basically, is for you to think about what links that you could make internally or externally, which can intertwine, make connections between the outreach that you are doing and the external context that we were talking about, or what people are doing internally. Like I was talking about the area of climate change, which every university has a strategy on, or should have, whatever it's called. Or on student success, which again, every university has some strategy on. So it's whether people want to do that. I think we've got at least one breakout room. So I think we'll do that. So for those of you who will not go into breakout rooms, Daniel, if that's okay for you to sort out?
Yeah, so perhaps, I mean, a few people indicated that they have to leave. So maybe if we just give people a minute to leave, just because I'm not quite sure who's going to stay for the breakout
Before
room.
people leave, can I just conclude by saying that these conversations have really been very valuable to us. It's given us time for really thinking about what we do. I mean, I've said this before, I know lifelong learning at University of Leeds is well resourced and compared to many places is supported, as John says. There will, that comes with plenty of issues, but it is supported. What I would like, that we don't want to just, sell or just flag up what we're doing, but we also want people to take on board and share, and for us to be able, later in the year to have more conversations, that idea that John has had about to look at strategy for rebuilding is something that maybe we should look at doing. We will be, as I've said, we'll be sending out recordings later. We will also be sending out for your feedback. And we would really like your feedback, particularly if people want to look at ways of going forward as a network. It doesn't need to be just with the University of Leeds leading, but it could be through the University Association of Lifelong Learning or elsewhere. But we would really appreciate that. So for those of you who are going now, thank you very much for coming. And please, if you've got ideas about working in partnership in any way, please do get in touch with us. And for those of you who are staying, we'll see you later. Bye just now. Okay, thinking about links, intertwining what you're doing in outreach with external or internal. Do people have thoughts on it? I see, Joe, you're now with UniConnect, so you're coming. And Joanne, you're UniConnect as well, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. Do we have anybody else from UniConnect here?
Yep, I'm here too. I'm Mary from Devon, from Plymouth.
Mary, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. So, okay, firstly, given that this is an area you're getting into, what are your thoughts around this? I'm talking generally to colleagues in UniConnect.
Sorry, sorry, but there's going to be a battle of the Joe and Joanne's there, but I am muted first. Okay, I think what's going to be really interesting for us is that the OFS, in terms of their guidance for this next phase of UniConnect, they have this fantastic ability to be both incredibly obscure in their guidance, but also really prescriptive. It's a really unique, I think, quality that the OFS managed to embody in their guidance. So, so I think there's still lots of questions around what adult engagement actually means, and therefore I think particularly in this forthcoming year, which the OFS are badging as a transition year, as far as I'm concerned, we need to use it to be bold and not simply go down the skills route agenda, and really to see who we can engage with, particularly thinking about some opportunities for family learning, linking in with what we're already doing within schools, and yeah, just really throwing sowing a thousand seeds, rather than starting off on that very FE straight into access route, which would clearly enable us to tick boxes, but doesn't cover any of the sort of sub areas that you've been talking about today. So that's my view on it.
Thanks, Joe. I need to come in and apologise to Neil again. Neil, UniConnect is like the widening participation collaborative regional networks that are in Scotland.
Absolutely, Lindsay. I'm loosely familiar with the name. I am indeed. I appreciate that.
So the Office for Students has now added Mature onto that, which is interesting. And it will be interesting to see if similar happens in Scotland, giving, you know, I know what the targeting is in Scotland.
Absolutely. The targeting, very much as you'll be aware in Scotland and for other colleagues here, is the notion of adult learners who are already taking higher national certificates or higher national diplomas in college, with a view for them what's referred to as articulation, to move in advanced entry settings into universities. So the Scottish system would offer a 4-year degree. Normally you would start in first year, but after an HNC or an HND, to argue to go into second or third year directly. Now, there are huge pedagogical issues around about that, partly due to the pedagogical legacies of different institutions. So ancient institutions are, as always, a little bit more stuck in the mud with their attitude to innovative pedagogy, whereas the newer universities aren't as much.
Yeah. So that links very much to the policies that are being articulated around the FE-HE progression in England. But yes, I mean, we know that in Scotland, in terms of outreach, there's very little being done in relation to widening participation and adults, and that's what the add-on is. So that is interesting, Joe. I mean, it looked to me as if it was very much looking as an IAG offer, right? UniConnect, would colleagues say that?
Yeah, I mean, I was basically going to say the same thing as Joe around them making it really clear that, you know, it is really for those that are already in FE, which doesn't help us lots. It does and it doesn't. And so what we're looking at doing when we submit our operating plan for the transition year is concentrating on IAG, because specifically we have trained our outreach assistants in level 6 careers advice and guidance. So that's what there's a lot of that already happening. That's a lot of what our offer already is. And so I was actually going to contact yourselves or use anyone within the network here, because yes, they are trained in that, but that's for young people. And so I'm looking at finding ways to offer or find additional training or experience and knowledge for IAG, specifically for adult learners. So that's what we're going to be offering essentially at the moment to those adult learners within the colleges. But in my mind, I'm still, yes, it's not necessarily on the OFS guidance, but the community element that you're talking about is still sort of very much in the back of my mind. So yeah.
Thanks.
I probably
Mary, have you?
Yeah, and I probably build on what Joanne has just said. So I work for NetStep Southwest, which covers Devon, Cornwall and Somerset, and I'm actually based in a further education college, and I speak regularly to somebody called Ellie Rowley from Dancop, and I'm part of an FEC network, who feel quite out of their depth at the thought of working with adult learners. I also chair a national group which talks about FECs, and it's an opportunity for practitioners to meet, very informal. We're kind of keen on making mistakes and putting strange ideas out there and just bouncing around, and very kind of relaxed. And what I kind of have picked up on is that each UniConnect is looking at this slightly differently and is very unsure of which way to go on limited funds. There is a awareness that as practitioners we have been previously heavily focused on schools, and that our staff don't feel confident in delivering to adults, worried about we may be saying the wrong thing, we may not necessarily understand some of the complexities, and it could seem a little inappropriate when a younger person speaks to somebody older, and it kind of can cause quite a few issues. Some of the ideas that have seen quite popular on around CPD and giving people opportunities to talk with practitioners, outreach practitioners, and see if we can share, not so that we're telling somebody how to do it, actually thinking we've got teams who are quite established to find out on where we could work. And also, I think my personal thoughts have been around community work for a while. I've been working on this for some activities for the last 2 years, where we've had an MP setting a challenge saying, hey, how do we deal with this? And students kind of talk about it, discuss it with academics, and it seemed to be really, really good, particularly at developing agency. And that's where my manager at my college wants me to develop. She feels that this is the way forward. You've got to get them passionate about learning and see all the different ways we could potentially work. But I think UniConnects will really struggle with our own limitation and potentially our lack of confidence in kind of going out there and doing something. But I think from what I'm seeing about the UniConnects, we're quite keen to collaborate with each other and, you know, move things forward.
Well, I mean, I think I said this in a previous conversation, but I mean, certainly we know, well, we talked about the reductions in adult participation and in adult skills, and that is an issue for all FE. You know, so their numbers are way down. So the funding that they are getting from the SFE, whatever that stands for again, is that Education Skills Funding Agency, I think. the funding they're getting has decreased, and there's real issues that mean reduced funding for next year. So from the point of view of connecting with new learners, you know, I think that there are real possibilities that people may be interested in linking with, you know, new initiatives, new organizations in a way that they haven't, because they need to. Certainly Leeds Further Education College, Leeds City College, is leading on a festival of learning, which, I mean, the festival of learning is supposed to take place at the beginning of July, but in fact Leeds is going to do a very long festival of learning, which will include ourselves and various other providers, just to try to get the message out about getting adults back into learning. So, you know, I think the issues around post-pandemic might actually help, you know, a new organization like UniConnect come in. Laura, I saw that you were saying that you were, I think, new to the area, and you're looking at, you know, please chip in when you feel like doing it. Sorry, Neil.
Thanks very much, Lindsay. Just, I mean, obviously listening to what colleagues are saying here about the Office for Students, which your frustrations remind me an awful lot of the Scottish Funding Council, who sometimes I don't know whether they know what up and down and left and right is, or what good and bad is either. But that aside, there's an interesting seminar. I think you get lots of people attending. However, one thing I'm very aware of is that the opportunities that your colleagues have talked about there, Lindsay, if there is a moment, try to influence, and given perhaps the nebulous nature of some of the OFS recommendations, that this is where leadership can come in, and where institutions and where groups such as your own, Lindsay, and the other institutions that are here can actually bring the professionalism, their expertise, their pedagogical knowledge to start to drive changes through that will work. And one of the things I'd be really interested to hear about from colleagues is that certainly a lot of my work with working class adult learners is part of a project called the Scottish Wider Access Programme, which is an access course, okay? Yeah. It's a 1-year access course. So we have individual learners with little or no qualifications who will go to their further education college. Yeah. They'll have an interview and a discussion. Now, it's not a case of you don't have enough qualifications. It's about setting out their aspirations, their desires, what they want to learn about, where they want to go. And that is fantastically successful. And long before I started doing it, it's been going for some 30 years now. And every year at the University of Edinburgh, we'll have anywhere between 70 and 90 students who will start on this route. Now, it will go to all institutions across Scotland. And that access route, it is the champion of routes for working class adults to change their life trajectories. And you will all be aware of the transformative and emancipatory nature of education. And it is so beautiful to see. And I really believe strongly in the access course as a way to be able to change lives. Now, also the caveat to that is that that's not the only success of adult education. Sometimes it's upskilling to re-engage with the labour market, and sometimes it's other bits and pieces. It's not just university as the end game. But I'd wonder, Lindsay, if you or other colleagues might be able to talk about your view on the access course, and the possibility of national access courses that are accepted across institutions, from the north of England to the south of England. And is that something that there's appetite for, or is the system too fragmented?
Thanks, Neil. I'm going, well, just quickly just to say I'm connected. I'm external examiner for Stirling. So no, but Willie, do you want to talk about foundation years? Are you there, Willie?
I am there, Lindsay. Yes.
Putting you on the spot there, but the equivalent of access to foundation.
Yes, I was rather hoping that you might offer Leeds's take first, but I'll go since I'm going to be offering this somewhere else. This is a bit unrehearsed. I mean, you hit, Neil, and I hope my internet will stay with me because it's lumpy. You've hit upon a really current threat learning world, because those access routes, am I audible?
No, you're coming and going. Do you want to try without your video, maybe, Willie?
Good point. I'll try that. I'll try without my video. The kind of access routes you described, Neil, have actually been there pretty much since the start. The issue is the extent to which they're recognised within different institutions, and the extent to which they're effective in different institutions, because different institutions have very different offers and different ways of operating. There's, you know, John Holford asked previously, how is it that a number of lifelong learning provision has survived within institutions? And certainly from the perspective of Sheffield, the only reason it survived is that we've been able to fund a foundation year that does something very similar to an access route, but is absolutely tailored to our own provision. And, you know, in terms of feeding to other institutions too, it can do that. We're not the right place for some of the students that we work with, and they can then feed into other institutions. And there's a real tension at the moment, because Lindsay mentioned the Auger report. There remains the very real possibility that government might decide to pull funding for foundation years. And if that were to happen, there's a real risk that a number of institutions that have been able to preserve some of their mature offer they'll be scrabbling desperately to try and find a way of continuing the kind of model you described. So I think the Scottish model exists very much, but there's a big debate about whether it exists more effectively within individual institutions or within an access route. And one would hope for a mixed ecology, but I'm not sure whether we'll end up there.
Yeah. So I think, Neil, there is from what I picked up in Stirling, there is a similar tension between with access happening in both university and FE.
Absolutely, it can do, Lindsay. Certainly our approach in Edinburgh has that the access course that I mentioned to you, the swap access course, will be a full-time access course for those learners who are able to do that. And ourselves as an institution, because the swap access course is a partnership across the country, whereas we have our own part-time access course for those who aren't able to do the full-time one, hoping that one way or another, local individuals will be able to engage that. But it's so sorrow to hear what Willie talks about there, when there's the threat of removing this. And this is this notion of large institutions and government policy, proclaiming about how beautiful and wonderful lifelong learning is on one side, and in that Janus complex, they turn the other way and remove the funding and remove opportunity for individuals. And that's a very difficult environment to exist in.
Well, one of the issues in England, with fees is that the foundation year is a lot more expensive than the access to HE diploma in FE, and government has queried that. Mary.
Sorry, I was just turning my microphone back on. There is one thing that has come up within the UniConnect's practitioner group I'm with, is that a lot of us are struggling because we can't find much research, or we don't have almost a blueprint of what works in adult outreach, which we can then, as UniConnect's employees, start to think about, okay, this is what you all think. How can we try and take this into what could meet some of our potential targets and things? And I just wondered if there's any kind of way that, if our practitioner group decides to focus on adult learners in the new year, is there some way that we could connect with professionals at universities and colleges to kind of give us some of these kind of tips, or steer us to some research articles or some kind of guidance? I think it could be quite useful.
Yes, I mean, you're absolutely right. There's not been a lot written on adult outreach and impact. And of course, the whole issue around impact which relates to funding, is incredibly important. And it's something that we have pushed the funding body on, because we know that they'll come back and sort of say, we're not funding this because you can't demonstrate impact. And one of the issues, obviously, for adults is there's not linear progression. So, you know, for schools, they can show progression from, you know, the school qualifications from GCSE onwards, as colleagues in Uni Connect will know about the importance of tracking, which of course is much more difficult with adults. But in relation to cascading practice, Mary, obviously Leeds, and we could look again, thinking about a network with colleagues, I'm sure colleagues at in the UL, the Universities Association of Lifelong Learning. It's certainly something that we could do if there was an interest in doing that. The last, I mean, we were involved in research that was funded, that was requested by the Office for Fair Access, which is what, 6 years old, which was led by John Butcher at Open University. So if you Google Open University Adult Outreach offer, you'll find the report there, but it doesn't give the kind of nitty-gritty.
I think it would be really helpful. I'll definitely give you an email, and if anyone else puts their email address into the chat and says, tags me in, I'll see if we can get you coming to talk to our group, because when I floated this and asked us to share even our initial thoughts, most of my colleagues in Uni Connect were like, yeah, I don't want to participate. I don't want to share my experience, my lack of knowledge. It was yeah.
No, I think that's a real problem, isn't it? And other colleagues would agree that there's not this kind of body of knowledge. And I know at Leeds, you know, we haven't been good enough about writing stuff up. The conversations has been much easier and got us to hone in our thoughts. But we should have written up more than we have. Okay, any other thoughts? Anyone else want to participate? Willie?
Lindsay, can I just come back to that
Oh,
point?
Sorry, Joe.
Yeah, just about that point about writing up thoughts. I think you know, when you talked around links to other HE agendas, I do wonder the extent to which the kind of KEF agenda, because obviously there's not research that can be written that's referable a lot of the time, but actually there is space in that KEF.
There is, yeah. And Joyce, so you should have pointed out, I didn't acknowledge KEF when I was talking about links.
Yeah, no, I think it's an important one there.
You're right. It's something that I haven't touched for years, actually, at Leeds. Yeah. So, what does KEF stand for?
Knowledge Excellence Framework.
Thank you. Yeah, good point, Joe. Willie.
I think the main heading under KEF that we fall under is very much a sort of a skills and training one, is part of the challenge there as well, of course.
Are you doing anything with KEF, Willie?
Not explicitly yet. We get asked what we're doing and we say this is what we're doing.
That's
but
what we do, yeah.
It's back to stakeholders, isn't it? Yeah. And who's driving what, which is a real challenge. I just wanted to come back very briefly on what Neil said about full-time, part-time, and I suppose this also reflects a little bit on what Mohammed was talking about the sort of accidental ripple effect, sometimes way down the line and what have you. But certainly what's been the saviour at the moment of lifelong learning in Sheffield, again, was being able to, because I ran a part-time standalone access program like one that Leeds also has for years and years and years, and we got nothing like the numbers you're talking about, Neil, into Sheffield. But once we were able to make it a guaranteed progression full-time route, we still offer part-time, but the vast majority, probably 98% of students that come to us, mature students, go full-time and not part-time. And that's kind of part of the contradiction, I think. We sometimes fall into the trap of thinking of mature students, and there's the flexibility you've talked about as well, Lindsay, about it. Somehow it must be about part-time somehow. And it's really difficult to hold all these things together in as I say, mixed ecology. It's just a reflection, I suppose.
I think there's probably a big difference in fees. Neil, the part-time fees are quite low, aren't they?
They can be, and they are covered by the Scottish Funding Council as well. Yeah. Which is one of the benefits, of course. Yeah. However, I suppose, as everybody will be aware, of course, in Scotland, when there are no fees that students pay tuition-wise, of course, that, as an ideological standpoint, that means that those working-class students don't receive decent bursaries.
That's right, yeah.
So everybody, regardless of income, will get free tuition. But if you come from a poor background, well, it's tough luck. You're only going to get a small bursary because some very well-off people are going to get their tuition fees paid for. So it's a curious ideology, not one that I would agree with. I would rather focus it on those who really need the support in that sense. So there's ups and downs wherever you go, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, anybody who wants to chip in at all? Willie, is that another hand up, or? I don't think so. Okay, I think we're getting just about to half hour, so we've gone half hour over. Can I say thank you so much, colleagues, for staying for the workshop, and apologies for my time, my timekeeping and thinking that we could do this in an hour. So I really appreciate that. I hope you've got something out of it. I found it a really interesting discussion. And as I keep repeating, it's clear that there is real interest in working with adults. There's not that many of us doing. I think that whole business about there not being, like a single point of body of knowledge or whatever, is really important, and something that, if given that lifelong learning is a thing at the moment, that maybe it's the time to exploit. So let's see where we go from there. We'll really look forward to getting your feedback. And as I said before, anything that you want us to do in supporting, or if there's kind of comparative work that we can do with you, I think colleagues would be really interested in doing that. So can I draw this to a close? And
yeah, just to say that we're going to send an email with the recordings of all the lunchtime sessions we did, so all the 4 ones, and we're going to send them out to you. I'm not quite sure when, so it might not be today or tomorrow, but sometime within the next few days.
Possibly not the next few days, Daniel.
Possibly not the next few, well, apparently, yeah. So we're going to send them out. In the meantime, yes, so if people were exchanging emails in the chat, so please feel free to do that, because we can't share, I guess, the emails of people registered for the event. But if you want to contact us, I think some of my colleagues put their emails in the chat, but always feel free to email us to cmp@leeds.ac.uk or lifelonglearning.uk, and people will be able to point in the right direction. And I think that's anything else. Yeah, so we're going to share the recording in the Padlet and the evaluation form, and that's us, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed for coming to these conversations, and hope to see you at some point. Bye just now.